You've waited all summer, and now fall is upon us. To talk college football from the highest points in the country, presented by the Far End of the Bench podcast and the Variety Sports Network. Your home for Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference football, featuring Jimmy Pilato and Rev, the Problem Coca. Season 3 of Top of the Mountain podcast. Ooh, look at that, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. We snuck up on you. I should probably be able to speak since I am an educator. Boys are back. We needed to take a little bit of a break. Rev had a change in his work schedule. We were able to work around it, and honestly, I was dead tired. We're on fall break as we're talking right now. So I needed a little bit of a second, and we're able to kind of get that reset, and then we're back right here, top of the mountain, going into, let's see, I have the schedule pulled up. I believe it's week 8. Is it
something like that? I have week 7.
I think week 7 might have been, let's see. I can count it out because I'm looking at it. 1.
No, you're right, yeah.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is going to be the 8th week of the college football season. Got a lot to talk about. We have a couple games that we were going to preview for you. We're just going to give you the recap. We're going to talk about the players of the weeks. Have a couple games that we picked out as pretty important coming up. And then obviously we've had the date circled. We're getting that much closer to it. But before we get to that matchup between Western Colorado and Colorado School of Mines, I think they deserve quite a big shout out because for the first time in school history, Colorado Mines is ranked number 1 in all of the Division II football polls. Ferris State ended up losing to Grand Valley over the weekend, so they moved themselves up, and I believe Western is now within the top 15 at number 12 in the country. So shout out to the Western Colorado Mountaineers, obviously Rev and I, alumni from that school. We're going to talk about all of that. Be sure if you're watching, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Far End of the Bench. You can check our regular episode. It's coming out tomorrow, and I'll have Sunday Scaries coming out on Friday. So if you want to catch up on all those shows, subscribe to this channel, leave a like, a comment, listen wherever you're listening to podcasts. Make sure you follow the Far End of the Bench and check out the Variety Sports Network as well. Follow Rev at Rev Coca. He's a contributor on Belly Up Sports with his written content. If you're a Steelers fan, you might want to go over and check out, just search his name on the Belly Up's website. You'll be able to find all of his writing. Rev, I know that you had a schedule change, but it honestly wasn't the worst thing in the world to take a little bit of a break. I don't know why we never really got bye weeks at the Division II level. Division I hands out bye weeks like candy. It's not bad to take a bye week every now and then.
Yeah, definitely in this case where just having that bye week is also just creating more separation. Just, there's still teams kind of sorting it out, kind of jostling for position, and ultimately it's kind of created a place where there are 2 people clearly sitting far ahead of the pack, and everything else is kind of mumbled jumbled in the middle everywhere else. But yeah, that bye week the bye week we had just ultimately created more clarity, just with more key matchups and created time for more separation between the teams.
And if I'm going to be 100% honest, it was going to be Friday the 13th that we were recording last. I'm a little superstitious, and if we would have talked again about Western Colorado and Colorado Mines having to stay undefeated for that matchup that we see coming down the pike, we probably would have ended up jinxing something. So we took the announcer jinx off of what was going to happen. Let's go ahead. Let's get right back into it. We're talking about players of the week. Just to give a mention to week 7. So surprise, surprise, John Matoka wins his 3rd offensive player of the week honors last weekend for week 7, 2 weekends ago, excuse me. Actually, it was Tommy Thomas. That's the one that we're looking at. Tommy Thomas, week 6 from Chadron State. Jackson Zimmerman for the defensive player of the week. And then we had Darian McGarity as Pueblo from CSU-Pueblo for the special teams player of the week. That's from week 6. Going to last week's players, this is where John Matoka gets his flowers for earning his 3rd offensive player of the week nomination. Colorado School of Mines is 7-0, 5-0 in the conference. They had a huge win over South Dakota Mines, 45-22. And Matoka was a huge part of that, 23 of 34 and 344 yards. 31-0 lead in the opening half, and he had touchdown passes of 37 and 54 yards before he finished up with a 3-yarder for his 3rd touchdown. It's just, at this point, it's a little bit too easy. I mean, we saw Dvorak when he was a quarterback at Colorado Mines. John Matoka has done everything that Dvorak did, and he has the possibility to do even more. If he can get Mines over that hump, and I mean, when are you going to have a better shot at a national championship than with like an 8th-year quarterback as the leader of your team, and a guy who's proven that he's probably one of the best offensive players at this entire level in the entire country, because he's already been Harlan Hill finalist. I believe he's won one, and now he's Conference Player of the Week once again.
Yeah. And although they haven't had that success of winning a championship yet, funny that you say that, because he already has. Well, he has just finally done more than Dvorak. I believe it was this last week where he broke Dvorak's record when it comes to all-time total touchdowns. So he's coming along on the end of his college football career, breaking the records that was put in place here. So really, it just comes down to them not slipping on a banana peel and just him continuing to light up the RMAC.
Yeah, it was he had his 1,000th career completion, and then he threw his 164th touchdown pass, which is what pushed him past Justin Dvorak, former Harlan Hill and standout quarterback for Colorado Mines. That's Offensive Player of the Week. Defensive Player of the Week is a guy that we talked about again on this show quite a bit. And that was Hunter O'Connor, the D lineman. He's initially from Broomfield, but he's playing for Chadron State, the junior. So Chadron ended up getting a big win, 43-14. They're kind of back on track as where they wanted to be. 2 sacks, 1 more tackle for loss, and he also forced a fumble and tacked on a critical interception, which he returned for 5 yards, and he was just all over the field. He's basically understanding that if he's going to do something, if the Eagles defense is going to be successful, you got to rush the passer, you got to stop the running back in the backfield, and if you can intercept the ball or disrupt the passing game outside of the pass rush, do that as well. If you can do it all, Hunter, then we'll be pretty good. Is where this kind of performance leads me with Chadron. Good for them, and he's obviously a really good player and deserves the recognition. But that's a do-it-all kind of person, and you're going to need that in order to be successful in Chadron.
Yeah, followed out, he's doing a lot of heavy lifting on this Chadron team, especially on the Chadron defense over the past 2 years, what he's been able to do, bursting onto the Division II scene. I'm sure your cousins finally happy to see some RMAC success here, and now they're kind of bunched into the group of teams in that 4-3, 3-4 kind of waiting to see which of these teams are in the upper echelon, which of these teams are going to sink back to the bottom half. So good to see them having some success here, feasting on some of the lower teams of the RMAC, but sometimes you need that to build the confidence up. And yeah, great defensive performance par for the course when it comes to what O'Connor's been doing over the last 2 years.
When you're able to shut down Adams, we can say what we want about Adams. You and I never really cared for them, but their offense is normally pretty explosive, and their defense was the driving factor in that win. It's a game that they don't win in the past couple of years. It's a game that they probably would have given away, but they were able to put their throats down, and Hunter O'Connor earns Defensive Player of the Week honors for his role in doing so. Special Teams Player of the Week was Jacob Willig, the kicker from Fort Collins playing for CSU-Pueblo. He was 8 for 8 on extra points, and he basically made sure that Pueblo flexed their muscles. They needed to. They've been flexing their muscles on the bad teams for the last couple of weeks. They pounded Fort Lewis when we said there might be a chance for an upset. We were talking about this game because Highlands has shown to be frisky, and when you're playing in Las Vegas, things can happen, and you're never really sure what's going to go down. But obviously, having that sure thing as a kicker, if you can finish your drives with a kick, whether that's a field goal, a PAT, or a punt, and you're putting points on the board, you're finishing with the amount of points that you're desired to have. That's huge, especially in Division II, because we've been on teams where you weren't able to rely on the kicker. We've been on teams where the kicker was going to possibly cost you the game, and when you are able to have confidence, like, it's so much nicer. Instead of having to drive 75 yards for a touchdown, if I could drive 50 yards to get myself a field goal range and we have a shot, that's awesome. So it's big for the CSU Pueblo Thunderwolves. Obviously, Jacob Willig, he had a lot of opportunity to score a lot of points. He's probably going to be pretty happy with his point totals after this past weekend.
Yeah, it's definitely good to kind of rack up the statistics there. And I know you, going back to the 2018 game against Adams State, we've been on the side of teams in which the special teams play was a little iffy. The kicking game is a little iffy, and that could have been one of the few determining factors of a win and a loss. So when you get that steady special teams play, it definitely makes a difference at this D2 level.
Those are your 3 players of the week for week 7 of the RMAC. We'll talk about who ends up winning them from this upcoming weekend. That's going to move us into our recap portion of the program. So recap of the entire scoreboard from last weekend. Chadron beats Adams 53-14. Colorado Mesa beats Fort Lewis in Durango 62-14. Pueblo takes down Highlands 56-7. Colorado Mines wins at home 45-22. And Western flexes their muscles, 15-point victory over Black Hills, remaining perfect on the season. And as we mentioned before, bumping themselves up into the upper echelon of teams in all of Division II college football. So that's the recap for everything. The games that we're focusing on: New Mexico Highlands and CSU-Pueblo to start us off. So the Thunderwolves go out to Las Vegas, New Mexico, only give up one touchdown on the day in the second quarter. Offensive explosion to start. Chance Fuller, 247 yards passing. Howard Russell, he had 81 yards rushing on the ground. Zach Rakowski, 133 yards receiving. You're getting big plays up and down, and I get text updates from the score since my sister's on the sidelines. So I wasn't actually watching the game, but I will tell you, as soon as Pueblo scored the first time, the floodgates opened. It was touchdown, 21-0, 42-0, 42-7. Oh, jeez. You guys, as much crap as we gave them and as bad as they look coming out of that weekend at Western Colorado, they have turned themselves around, and they're going to be right in the thick of things. If Western and Colorado Mines have some utter collapse towards the end of the season, guess who's going to be right there with the pickings? They've done it before, winning a conference championship with, I think they've only won 7 games in a season. And CSU Pueblo, they're not going anywhere. They're proving that they can still beat up on the bad teams.
Yeah, without a doubt, you can see they're getting their confidence back after that rough 1-3 start. Sure, definitely just in that situation where the coaches, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of uncertainty. They started off 1-3, but ever since then, they've just been feasting on the back half of the schedule, which is really lighting up here. You saw Chance Fuller with the typical performance, with Retzlaff and Rakowski, who have been his main favorite targets throughout the season, really producing like they normally have. And yeah, you can really see in the second half of the year the separation between a team like Highlands, who kind of start off the season pretty hot. They've kind of hit a rough patch. Now they're the second to last team in the RMAC. And Pueblo really just, like you would say, just flexing on a weaker team here, beating them up from pillar to post.
It's you just compare the quarterback play. Chance Fuller, 20 of 27, 247 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have 1 interception. But over on the other side, Gage, we're going to see Guardiola, 4 of 11, 24 yards passing, 1 interception. As a team, New Mexico Highlands had 37 passing yards. They had a net of 121 yards on the ground. But if we're looking just
they're kept under 200 all game. Wow.
Yeah, they were under 200 for the entire game. CSU Pueblo had over 200 yards rushing, and like we said, Fuller had a big day passing, and then Stevie Kroll, when he came in mop-up duty, 5 of 5, 56 yards, and it pushes the team total for CSU Pueblo up over 308. But that defense they swarmed. They feasted. They had one guy go for more than 50 yards on the ground. Not only are you able to affect the passing game at that point, you are dominating up front on every side of the ball. You can run the ball when you want to. You can stop the run. If they're going back to pass, you're going to sack the quarterback. That defense for CSU Pueblo is what they've hung their hat on, and this was a performance where you look at it, and that was the defense winning this game, giving them the momentum they needed to, and totally shutting out New Mexico Highlands at home, which is not easy to do.
Yeah, it's definitely the momentum that they need heading into their primary rival next week against Chadron State, being able to beat up on a weaker team, and now they come in a locker room full of morale and high spirits. So bring on the Chadron State Pueblo game next week.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Let's see. This weekend, it is in Nebraska also, which is right because my sister's dropping her dog off with me for the weekend. So they're going to be in Chadron, but that is going to be – I'm interested to see what's going to happen this weekend because that is obviously, like you said, that's their natural rival. Those are the two schools that they decided to hate more than anything. It doesn't really make sense because it's Nebraska and Southern Colorado, but it is what it is. Pueblo gets a huge win, 56-7, and they continue rolling right along. Other game that we're going to recap is the Mines versus Mines, the Engineer Bowl. Boy, how far has South Dakota Mines fallen? They're a roller coaster ride. We should have just said this from the start. This is the typical South Dakota Mines Hard Rocker season, where your offense at times looks god awful at times. Looks like they can't be stopped by anybody. You can put the Dallas Cowboys out there and they're still going to be able to score. But just you're always in these parts where you're take the next step. Take the next step. You dominated Black Hills in the Black Hills Brawl this year. In a season that I didn't think you were going to be able to win. Turn around and have some success behind it. Put up a fight against Colorado Mines, and you get shut out in the first half. You're down 21-0 by the time you look up at halftime. You only muster 22 points, which granted 22 points against Colorado Mines defense this year is something. That's not the Jaden Johansson that we were accustomed to seeing. You guys have the experience at this point. This shouldn't be an issue that we have to talk about every single year for South Dakota Mines, where they never go through the middle part of the season very strong. It's just always a struggle.
Yeah, looking at that box score, really, the box score does it a lot more justice than what the game really was because Mines or South Dakota Mines, that is, I need to clarify, but they didn't score for the entire first half. And then you look at the second half, and he threw for 3 touchdowns. Ben Nolan, who for the most part has been his primary receiver for the whole season, did pretty well. He didn't score the touchdowns, but I know he went for over 137 yards. So you saw that they're able to regroup and get some yards off in the second half. But by then it was already too late. I didn't watch that. I don't know if at that time they were putting in backups or rotating relief players. But ultimately, as explosive as the offense is going to be, you got to play for 4 full quarters, especially when you're going up against this Mines team in which they're not going to hesitate to squash on RMAC competition. So let's see if Black Hills State could get going a little earlier next week.
Black Hills had a tough-ass schedule coming down the stretch. They go from Western, they're at Western, and then I believe they go this weekend. Let's see. I always have it up, and then I move. They're hosting Colorado Mines, but that's still like you're still hosting the number 1 team in the conference that hasn't lost, and now, oh, yeah, they're the number 1 team in the country. And they're that for a reason because they have the studs and the players around them. We don't necessarily talk about him quite as much on the show as we probably should, but Max McLeod for the last 2 seasons has been an unreal passing threat at the Division II level, and he's not just a guy that can get down the field, and they do have the big stretch plays to him. He's a guy that they throw on that bubble screen that they get about 15 yards of pop on too. He can move with the ball in his hands, and I will say just the discipline, you can tell, even though these are both engineering schools, you knew which one was the more disciplined team. Colorado Mines is a well-oiled machine, pun very much intended, but they just everybody does everything very, very well, whether it's the receivers blocking, whether it's the offensive line being in the right spot, giving Matoka a chance to throw, and if Matoka has to get rid of it or move with his legs, he's very quick to do that too. This is a team that has very few, if any, weaknesses, or at least not ones that I've been able to see exposed this year.
Yeah, at this point, it really just feels like South Dakota Mines is picking up the remaining scraps that Colorado School of Mines doesn't pick up and just try to make a team out of that, in which they definitely they've gone to the point where they're a good wild card. They're a team that gets score points in the flurry and perhaps, give a team like Mesa a scare, but ultimately it just feels like the scraps of Colorado Mines, in which is a machine, they're a system, they're well-rounded, they're physical, and they all buy into the structure. Like, this is their 3rd coach in however many years, and it feels like they haven't skipped a beat.
It is very impressive when you can have the amount of turnover, because they had their coach for quite a long time before they made that initial run to the quarterfinals a couple years ago, and then they've had back-to-back seasons where they get brand new coaches. And you're right, there's not a big letdown. There's no what was me, anything like that. They just come in, they go to work, and they're always doing the correct thing. Real quickly, one more time, recapping what happened last week, week 7 of RMAC action. Shadron takes the win over Adams in Alamosa, 53-14. We're going to talk about Adams just here in a second. Colorado Mesa gets the win on the road, 62-14. Pueblo wins in New Mexico, 56-7 over Highlands. And then Colorado Mines, obviously, 45-22 over South Dakota Mines. Western Colorado beats Black Hills, so they run the South Dakota table just like Colorado Mines is looking to do this weekend. And then, obviously, we'll talk about some of those other matchups, the ones we're going to focus on. So for your Adams State / Colorado Mesa fans, I can't believe this is a game that Rev and I decided to cover because I hate Adams more than anything. Rev does not like the maroon, black, and gold of Colorado Mesa, yet here we are. This should be a very competitive matchup because what I've seen from these two teams so far this season, looking at box scores, looking at their records. So I have both schools' records pulled up. Adams is currently 3-4 on the season. just like Colorado Mesa. I would say, let's see, a couple wins on the schedule for Adams. They've I'd say the one surprising one was New Mexico Highlands. It was a hard-fought game, but I thought New Mexico Highlands was going to be able to overcome them. And obviously, we talked about Colorado Mesa, huge overtime win at Division I opponent, University of San Diego, and then you come back and have the shootout victory over South Dakota Mines. But since then, tough sledding. You had your get-right game against Fort Lewis. Both teams have already had that debacle of everything. But when they play a team that's somewhat competent, as I'm looking at Adams, and the last weekend performance against Shadron was ugly. And, I mean, Colorado Mesa, 43-7 at Western Colorado. They turn around and get blanked 52-0 against Colorado Mines. Like, both teams are in desperate need of a, holy shit, let's hold on to the rope and try and stop ourselves from skidding. But I don't think either of these teams, they probably played themselves out of contention for any kind of conference bid or anything like that.
Yeah. I at least get the feeling from Mesa that they're just young and frisky and fiery and are going to play hard. However, just the feeling that I get from Adams State is a feeling that I've always got from them, but it's only like exacerbated and gotten worse this year in the fact that they're front runners. Like, they could go up against a team that there's a big stylistic or physical advantage of, or maybe a team that's just right behind them. They could squeak out a game against Fort Lewis, or they could, beat a New Mexico Highlands or a team like that. But each time they've lost, I don't even think they've kept them within 3 touchdowns. Like, they seem to get, like, whenever one thing goes wrong with Adams State, everything goes wrong with Adams State. So,
you ready for this? So the losses this season for Adams: at West Texas, 28-7; at Colorado Mines, 70-7; at Colorado University Pueblo, 43-10; against Shadron State at home, 53-14. Those are the losses that Adams brings to the table. If we're going to do the same thing for Colorado Mesa, they got killed first weekend against Kingsville, 30-10. Ended up winning the next 2 weeks, and then the 2-point loss against Black Hills at home. Then obviously 43-7, 52-0. You can look at it and say that Mesa's had a couple more impressive victories, because you're right. When Adams gets killed, they get absolutely thunderstruck. 70 points. I've never given up 70 points in a legitimate football game. And there were a couple times where we probably should have talent-wise, but that's just a pride thing at that point. And I'm not trying to be that guy. I'm not trying to be a Western fan to tell you Adams State fans what I'm sure you're very aware of. You guys have no mental toughness. Rev is correct. You guys are front runners. When things go well, then you're all good. It's like playing a team from Montbello. I know you used to play in AYL.
The Falcons, yeah.
They'd have some great athletes, guys that nobody can tackle. But as soon as you hit him one time and he doesn't get able to go outside, they start turning on each other. They start fighting in the huddle. They start screaming at each other on the sideline. That is Adams State to a T, yet you're trying to play Division II college football. You got to get a coaching staff in there. You got to get a culture in there. You're dirty. I don't know about you, but I've had some pretty weird recruiting experiences when it comes to Adams State. Their coaches have told me some pretty wild stories that I'm not going to repeat here, because it's no use getting them in trouble, and it's really not worth it, because I was never going to go to Adams in the first place. But there's a reason why you have this feeling, and there's a reason why you always have front runners. And I will tell the story again. We had a guy coming off of a 7-year stint in prison playing middle linebacker for Adams State, my true freshman year, Rev's redshirt freshman year, attempted manslaughter with a brick. What? He's 30.
I kicked out a boulder for that one. Yeah.
He's 30. You guys got to figure this out. What's your prediction? Who do you think is going to come out on top? It is in Grand Junction. I think that's one thing to mention. It is the homecoming game for Colorado Mesa. I don't necessarily think that Adams is going to be able to get off to a hot start, but I'll let you make your pick first.
Yeah, it's tricky in the case that Mesa's offense has been erratic at times, but I think they can rely on the receiving play of Keenan Brown, who has been their go-to guy all season, and they could at least rely on that to get into an offensive rhythm. They have a capable passing game. Yeah, the mistakes are there. There's a high count of interceptions, but they can move the ball through the air, and also that home field advantage against a team in which Adams can be good. Like, if they play ahead, they can put up points, but I think this away territory, Grand Junction, is a very hostile environment to play in. Once they get going, I just feel like Adams State's going to turn on each other. It's a culture full of JUCOs, they haven't had a lot of time to bond with each other. The chemistry isn't always as at a high, and you always see that in their losses. So I could just see this as a game that maybe is competitive in the first half, but once they get the rhythm of Keenan Brown and his offense going, once his defense can cause some turnovers with Jason Tome, who has 4 picks on the year, it's going to get ugly really fast. And as the game goes on, maybe as the second half gets in, Mesa's just going to pull ahead and make it ugly.
I really think because I feel like Mesa is going to have a lot of juice because they're probably more aware of what they are than Adams in their locker room. But Mesa's had a couple players that won Special Teams Player of the Week. They have a couple guys that are dangerous in the return game. I could see a huge return to start the game, or at some point early on, Mesa's going to get a huge momentum swing, and that's what happens. That's why Special Teams is there. If you have good special teams, you can ignite a fire. So maybe the offense starts off slow, maybe the defense gets a stop, and then all of a sudden – a big punt return, you set yourself up with either a short field or you return it to the house. That's your momentum that you need, and that's the dagger for Adams State. If Adams State gives up a long kick return, an interception return for a touchdown, anything like that, I just see them going into the tank. So I'm agreeing with you. I think Mesa's going to get the win at home for homecoming week, and Adams is going to continue their slide. I don't know if they're going to be able to win. We'll take a look at their schedule coming up, but getting past 3 wins for them this season – maybe a little bit out of the cards as we only have 4 weeks left in the regular season. Other game that we're going to talk about, make our predictions for, number 1 team in the country, Colorado School of Mines Ore Diggers, going to Spearfish, South Dakota, to take on the host, Black Hills State Yellow Jackets. Black Hills 4-3 on the season. They're 3-2 in the conference. Colorado Mines, perfect undefeated record with names on their hit list such as number 3 Grand Valley State, number 4, Angelo State. That one was on the road. They beat up Pueblo 55-14. They beat up Adams, scoring 70 points on them. They just came off back-to-back weeks where they put up 90 points combined and only gave up 22. Colorado Mines is just as good as advertised. They're everything that we thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season, and they might not be better than the team that they had last year, but they play very well together. They're a well-oiled machine. I guess I'm going to ride that pun all the way to the end of the show. We're just going to talk about, because we know all the good things that Colorado Mines does. What is Black Hills' best opportunity to be able to pull out a win? Do they have to go to bed and flush an ice cube down the toilet, wear their pajamas inside out to hope for some snow on Saturday? Maybe slow down this offense of Colorado Mines? Or is there a way that Black Hills can beat the number 1 team in the country?
Well, their best bet is just to jump on them early. I remember last year, Western Colorado made it a game against Colorado Mines in which they got off to an early start. And I think Black Hills State has some capable weapons, especially on the offensive side of the ball, in which they can make Mines sweat a little bit. The play of Tanner Clarkson so far this season has actually been pretty steady, pretty reliable. He's getting the ball out to his players with Hassan Williams and TJ Chikora, which have both had very productive seasons at receiver. Nolan Sussel, I don't know how to say that last name, but he's been a quality dual threat, which you see he has seven rushing touchdowns, 3 receiving touchdowns. It's kind of been their all-purpose back. So Tanner Clarkson has 3 liable weapons in which he could really use, in which if they get going early, if they can get solid offensive line play to give him time to distribute it to his weapons, then maybe by halftime you're looking at a game and you're thinking, how is Black Hills State up by 3? And the goal really is just to get going early, and maybe that gets Colorado Mines in a funk. I mean, usually they're very disciplined. You don't really see that very often from Colorado School of Mines, but who knows if they could get going a little early with Clarkson at QB, Sussel at running back, and Williams and Chikora. If their primary weapons could show up and be as reliable as they've been for most of the season, then maybe we're talking about a ball game through 3 quarters.
I'll tell you what would make me feel completely different about this weekend's matchup is going back 2 weeks when we talked about Black Hills in the Black Hills Brawl against South Dakota Mines. I mentioned that you're the home team in the rivalry this year. You have the home field advantage. It's not much of a home field advantage because the other team only has to go 30 minutes away, but you got to be able to use that. You got to win the games that you should win at home. And not only did they not win the Black Hills Brawl, they got absolutely boat raced by their in-state rival, who is also struggling this season, 49-14. I would say that you have the advantage because Colorado Mines is going to be on the 12-hour bus trip all the way up. It's going to be dark. It's going to probably be cold. My only issue is if I'm gonna peg a team in the RMAC that's not gonna get affected by the weather or extenuating circumstances outside of themselves, it would be Colorado Mines. So maybe as much as this home field advantage is going to help the travel schedule, possibly bad weather that Colorado Mines hasn't had to deal with yet this season, maybe you can rely on that. But if I'm going to be a betting man, if I'm going to make a prediction on this game, I'm going to be making it with the team that I just have full confidence and trust in until they prove it otherwise. So I'm picking Colorado Mines, and I'm sure you probably have some similar thoughts. But who do you think is going to come out with the W?
Yeah. Well, follow that, I'm picking Colorado Mines. However, yeah, you do bring up a good point in how weather could potentially affect things. And, well, Landon Walker and Noah Roper, the running backs, have kind of been a 1-2 punch of Colorado Mines. Haven't necessarily been like slouches, but who knows what would happen if there's a bad weather game and that affects the passing game, that affects their rhythm, and all of a sudden, they have to rely on a running game in which hasn't been the same ever since Michael Zeman has left. And all of a sudden, they're having to rely on that, and they have to go through their plan B. Yeah, they have the offense in front, which I think they could do it competently, but who knows? What if the whole entire game plan switches up because going to that Spearfish, South Dakota environment, which is always very cold. Both the times I played there, it was snowing. So, so
that was the one time I saw Coach On actually shiver and show some weakness. By the second half,
his hands were in his pocket. He was trying to play it a cool, like, hey, guys, you better not wear your long sleeves.
You guys can't wear sleeves. What are you?
I see you. I see your lips. I see you shivering. You can try to play it off all you want, but we see it.
You'd be crying if your tears weren't frozen to your face right now. You sadistic. Yeah, I'm not going to finish that. That's so we both have Colorado Mines. That's our predictions. I have the D2football.com rankings pulled up. Let's talk about this here. So in these rankings, so it's a little bit different than the AFCA ones. Colorado Mines still number 1. They have Grand Valley. They're still hanging around. They're not going anywhere. They're number 2. Pittsburgh State at 3. Minnesota State at 4. Those teams are all undefeated. Ferris drops from 1 to 5 after losing to Grand Valley. Western Colorado comes in 1 behind West Florida. I've seen West Florida play a couple years ago. They were in the NCAA championship. I believe it was 3 years. It was the year before the pandemic happened. So I believe it was in 2019. I watched them play in that one. They're a good team. Western Colorado, though, they're steadily moving up. And this weekend, let's see, I have the schedule pulled up. Where they are hosting Adams. Nope, they're hosting New Mexico Highlands in Gunnison. They're hosting Highlands. Highlands has gone into Western and upset them before. I called one of those games on the radio. We've said it for the past few weeks. Mines and Western both have had a gauntlet of trap games because you can't tell me that people in Golden aren't looking over to Gunnison and thinking, oh, my goodness, what would that be like if we're undefeated going up to play against them, and vice versa for people that are in Gunnison and all the people that I know that are either currently watching this show or will watch the show at some point when I post it in all the groups. This has to be a game where you take it seriously. If you take it seriously, you set yourself up for – it's the biggest game for Western Colorado football since, when they're winning RMAC championships back-to-back. It's the biggest game for Western Colorado's program since the Kearney game in 2021. There's no argument. No, it would be, and there's probably more on the line. I know that was a playoff game. That was no expectations. Everybody was just so happy that you were there. This year, you have expectations. This year, because you've proven it the last few seasons, and you've always proven it against Colorado Mines, that you play them tough no matter what, no matter where it is. But you have to take care of business this week. I am sure that they've heard it. They're probably sick of hearing about it because I know Coach Baines, Coach Baines, Coach Van Grohl, Coach Auer, all those guys are going to be telling them, if we lose focus this week, that Saturday matinee that we're going to have in Golden next weekend loses a lot of its luster. Take care of your business. Go 1-0 this week. Continue to prove why you should be in the top 15 of the country and why you should continue to move up. But I think we should give those two schools a shout-out. Obviously, the RMAC is notorious for having at least a couple teams contending for the playoffs every year, and for the past few seasons when it's been Western Colorado as one of them. I'm wearing my stuff. Rev's wearing his Western stuff. It's just a cool thing to be able to be a proud alumni and see where the guys have put the program, because that it's pretty much established now. I'm hoping that they're able to continue it, and I'm hoping what I say, I'm knocking on wood as we speak. But they deserve the recognition. They deserve the shout out for where they've been able to put themselves in the rankings conversation.
Yeah, I would like to think they have too much fortitude to come out and lay a goose egg against New Mexico Highlands, but I do remember the game in 2019, our senior game, and yeah, it was definitely a different scenario. We're now more, Western's a lot more of a winning culture now, but we've been there where things kind of felt a little lackadaisical. People were joking around. New Mexico Highlands comes around this senior day, and we're thinking, there's no way we can lose the Highlands. And then guess what? Our offense just shows up stale as ever. And we're looking by the end of the game, and New Mexico Highlands squeaks out of, I don't remember the score, but it was a very low scoring.
It was like 3 big plays in the entire game separated the entire score.
Yeah, and I think that was like a charity game because like that year, one of the dorm rooms flooded, or I don't know if it was like a pipe or like a pipe exploded or whatever happened. And we were going to try to donate by each and every touchdown. We would donate this amount to the apartments, and we laid a complete goose egg. I don't even think we scored one touchdown that entire game. So I think Western right now, they got too much fortitude, too much grit to let that happen to them. But ultimately, Highlands, they got a competent rushing game. They got a running attack. They're always going to have these athletes every once in a while. It's not a great defense, but you'll always see like 2 or 3 people who stand out in that crowd, maybe a Division I bounce back or something like that, in which, yeah, you got to take those guys seriously because they'll have some athletes.
It's going to be a tough matchup. Other matchups coming up for this weekend, CSU-Pueblo going out to Chadron. That game kicks off at noon Mountain Standard Time. All these games are going to be able to be streamed on the RMAC network if you're not able to make it out live. Fort Lewis going up to Rapid City to take on the South Dakota Mines Hard Rockers. That game also kicks off at noon. Highlands Western will be at 1 p.m. in Gunnison, Colorado. Adams and Mesa also at 1 p.m. And Mines at Black Hills. So you're going to have to do some strategic screening if you want to watch all the games, but they're all starting around the same time. And obviously we touch on the matchups that we think are going to be the most important going into this upcoming weekend, week 8 of the RMAC football season. Let's take a look at these standings before we get out of here. It was a good bounce back episode. I feel like we're ready. We've recovered from our adversity, and now we're going to be ready to rock and roll all the way through, hopefully a deep playoff run. Speaking of the playoffs, our number 1 team in the country, currently the number 1 team in the RMAC, and I'm going to say that it's not just because of the alphabet. It is true. You got to be able to beat the best if you want to be the best. Colorado Mines, 7-0, perfect on the season, along with Western Colorado, also 7-0 and 5-0 in the conference. Both teams on 7-game winning streaks. Both teams on a collision course for a possible huge showdown next weekend in Golden. Those two have the tie for first currently. Black Hills, CSU-Pueblo, Adams, Chadron, and Mesa, and South Dakota Mines. They're all, Black Hills and Pueblo are tied for the 2nd/3rd spot. Adams, Chadron, Mesa, and South Dakota Mines are all tied for the technical 4th spot. However, that one's going to work out. That's the upper quartile of the conference. We know who are down at the bottom there with Highlands and Fort Lewis. But out of those few schools that I mentioned, a couple clumps, is it more surprising for you to see CSU-Pueblo hanging around that 3 spot, or is it more surprising for you to see just how far South Dakota Mines has fallen because we had such high hopes for them the last few weeks of the season?
Honestly, wouldn't be surprised if South Dakota Mines could maybe climb themselves up to maybe finish with like a respectable 6-5. But yeah, they just kind of come across some rough times. Like, keep in mind that the last 2 weeks they played Colorado School of Mines and Western, so it's not necessarily so surprising that they're at 3-4 now. It's just that they just came across a rough patch in the schedule. But looking at where things are now with those 4-3 and 3-4 teams, you really have to look at both the South Dakota teams and CSU-Pueblo as teams that can maybe climb themselves out of a deficit or out of wherever they're at right now. I'm very curious to see how that CSU-Pueblo and Colorado Mesa game and what happens there. I think Pueblo has a more reliable offense. You have Chance Fuller playing well. You got Keon Martinez and Howard Russell at running back, and I think they're a little steadier. So I definitely would like to think that Pueblo would be one of those teams that could climb themselves into the upper half of the RMAC, but the South Dakota teams are not too far behind. In terms of any surprises, maybe Adams State being within that group is a little surprising, but they're gonna their schedule gets a little rougher now.
I see them moving down towards New Mexico Highlands, Fort Lewis. We tried to give Fort Lewis as much shine as we have. We probably talked about them more than what they've been putting out onto the field. Still winless. They have not won a game since October 5th, 2019, but New Mexico Highlands at 2-5 on the season and Fort Lewis at 0-7 bring up the rear when we're talking standings wise. That's an overall look. We gave you a couple previews. We gave you a couple recaps. We're obviously going to be back. We'll figure out what day it's going to be because it is based off of Rev's work schedule, but we'll definitely be back next week to try and have a recap. We'll talk about the big games coming up, and then we got to preview this hell of a matchup that we may have next weekend in Golden on October 28th. That's what I'm looking forward to. I'm going to get through fall break. I'm going to get through that week that we have to come back solely so that I can go sit out in Golden and possibly see Western and Colorado Mines go at it undefeated.
Yeah, let's cross those fingers, man. It's literally a game away, man. Just don't slip on the banana peel. Highlands is game. If you let them stick around in the game, they will stick around. And Black Hills State is no slouches, but just cross our fingers because just the level of stakes that will go into that game. Because I was there 2 years ago when both teams were undefeated in Mines and Western. It just having that game go into overtime, it felt special. And I don't know, we deserve to have that type of matchup here in the RMAC.
I'm hoping for it. I'm looking forward to everything. Everybody, we appreciate you tuning in, whether you're listening live, listening back to the replay. Be sure to subscribe, follow at FEOTB Pod, follow at Rev Coca, and check out the Variety Sports Network at Variety_Sports_ for all the things that you can get. If you're looking for more sports content, we got plenty of it for you, and we got a whole bunch of different categories. So anything that you're looking for, check us out, Variety Sports Network, far end of the bench. We'll have Sunday Scaries coming up either tomorrow or Saturday. New episode of the podcast drops tomorrow morning early. So if you're an early riser and you want to listen to it for work, you have it there available to you. And be sure to follow at FEOTB Pod. Tell a friend to check out the show and everything like that. We appreciate it. For myself, Jimmy Pilato, my co-host, Rev Coca, enjoy the RMAC football schedule this weekend. We will catch you guys next week.